Hello and welcome to God versus God, where we pit ancient gods against each other in a head-to-head contest for the chance at the ultimate comeback. I'm Andrew here with Matt.
Hello.
Ready to start season 2 and ready to start the process to summon our second deity.
Yes.
So we're back in the GVG studios, as I like to call them.
Yes.
A little bit after the new year, but still technically in January as we're recording this.
That's true.
And I had a couple of resolutions this new year, and of course one or two of them have already fallen by the wayside.
Sure.
But that happens. But this recording is going to get me back on track for probably my most important one, which is summoning an ancient Egyptian god out of retirement to help save the world.
Perfectly timed. Yeah, that's great.
Because this is the start of season 2, ancient Egyptian gods.
Yes.
We plan to add an Egyptian god to our new pantheon in order to save the troubled world. So, geographically, we're just jumping across the Mediterranean from the north side to the south side. But in addition, we're actually going back in time.
Right.
As the written records in the Egyptian religion go back to 3000 BCE.
Yeah.
Predating our season 1 sources by at least 1500 years. And so just a little background here, Egypt had their own pantheon, many deities, different roles. And some of the names I think in the forms are going to be somewhat familiar to many of our listeners. We're going to talk about Osiris, Isis, Anubis, who was the dog-headed god.
Right.
And famously Bastet, who was the cat goddess.
Yes.
Ever popular. So, if you're not that familiar with Egyptians, I think you're going to be particularly rewarded as we learn about these deities together. There's going to be plenty of male genital mutilation, serpent, always popular, serpent battles.
Yes.
And just general weirdness. But it's also, I think, an interesting cosmology and philosophy. It's going to be kind of interesting to learn about. We're going to start this season with Ra, who is both the god of the sun and the primary creator god, and his daughter Hathor. So we're going to stick with our tried and true 5 categories: head-to-head judgment, determine our winner for season 1 victor. And as I said, tried and true. But I do want to acknowledge that, we had some feedback on one of our categories, Matinee Idol, which god would make a better movie or limited series.
Right.
Few listeners questioned a little bit as to whether this actually contributes to finding the best god to help save us. And I want you to know that we heard those comments and then we decided just to ignore them.
Blithely ignored. Yes. Not even, yes. I mean, we gave you seconds of our valuable attention, but then just went the other way.
We decided finding a new category was just too hard. So
sorry. Thanks for speaking up, but no can do.
All right. We hear you, but that's it. So you have anything else to add before we kick off here on
I think you kicked it off well, Andrew. I think the folks that I spoke with, a select few dedicated listeners, just mentioned we were going to Egypt for season 2. They were predictably thrilled and said, first season, although just so mainstream, all these well-known characters, all these very conventional plots. Yep. Why don't you guys apply your crowd-pleasing, family-friendly formula to something much more obscure, much more out there, a little more unexpected, a little more bizarre. I think Egypt, based on the work we've done so far, is going to deliver that and then some. So, friends, your prayers have been answered. It's about to get even weirder. Season 2.
That is. All right. So I have, I'm going to start it off, and I have the creator god as well as god of the sun, Ra, also known as Re or Autumn Re. So Ra, in terms of etymology, literally meant sun in ancient Egyptian. So very straightforward.
Sun with a U.
Sun with a U, yes. The thing up in the sky. So the autumn part is from what was originally a separate creator god, and his name meant to complete or to finish. Um, but over time, the two were merged together, and as ancient deities with modern sensibilities, they decided to adopt the hyphenated name. And this is something that Ra is going to do with a lot of other deities that we'll see throughout the season, just using that hyphenated name. There's Amun Re, there's Sobek Re, which is the crocodile god. So we'll see that come up a few other times. But so in the beginning, there was a swirly, whirly ocean of chaos called the Nun. And self-created into this water was Autumn Ray. So Ra is alone in nothingness, which can perhaps be thought of as kind of a womb-like environment. Sometimes it was actually depicted as an egg. And though the Egyptians wouldn't have heard of these, I sort of thought of it as a sensory deprivation tank.
Oh yeah.
So he's just floating around, kind of doesn't feel anything. It's warm. But gradually Ra becomes aware of himself as a separate being and is maybe getting a little nauseous floating around in nothingness. So he decides to create land as a base of operations.
Sure.
A little island that the Egyptians called the Ben, Mount Ben. So he's there and then starts creation. And there's two schools of thought of how he did this. In one school of thought, it's just by thinking of things or speaking them that Ra creates them. For example, he has insight, and then he realizes, I just had an insight, and he has created the deity Sia, the god of insight. And then realizing that he could create through his own words, he creates Hu, the god of authoritative speech, and so on. So just as he thinks of things come into existence. But in other versions of the creation myth, the act of creation is actually much more explicitly physical. And in these, Autumn Ray is called the one who made himself millions. So in this one, Autumn Ray is there on his little island. He's created Mount Ben, and he's alone on the island. And, now he has a sense of up and down, and he's not floating around weightlessly anymore. So, he starts checking himself out, say, feeling things around, and, one thing leads to another. He starts feeling himself, and he finishes doing that. And there's a little bit of a mess. That's right. So he takes the mess that he's let out, and he puts it in his mouth. Or actually,
sorry, he puts it where?
His mouth or his beak, depending on how you want
details
to picture this. Which acts as a womb and gestates the goddess Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, and spits her out of his beak, and then he blows Shu, the god of air, out of his nostril. Not sure which nostril, but and then I'm going to break in the narrative just for a second. So I'm going to flash my screen up here for Matt's benefit.
He is always embracing our audio only format with visuals.
What I'd like to do is have Matt sort of describe this to the listener for their benefit, and I think that will kind of help them get a feeling for what this creator god looks like. So and we share that. Can you see that, Matt?
I can now see. Yes, and it's a remarkable image. Do you just want me to kind of freestyle on what's there?
Yeah.
All right. So
tell listeners what they're seeing.
It looks like at the center we have what I assume is Ra, so the sort of a falcon head on a man's body, but the man is very well tanned. First of all, must be all that time in the sun. It looks like a headdress that contains what appears to be the sun, which again fitting for his role. It looks like there's some sort of serpent woven around that sun, a little serpent head sticking out of the sun.
That's right.
I'm also seeing, so he's got two pieces of business in his hands. Looks like his right hand is holding a staff, which may be the waz sort of staff of a ruler. The left hand appears to be holding the Ankh symbol, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh wow, he's done
Yes.
his homework, people.
there is some crossover with the second part of our program. So staff in the right, Ankh in the left. He appears to be on some sort of very minimalist kind of fancy canoe kind of boat.
Yeah.
I see some oars in the back. I see sort of a classic Egyptian eye in the front. And then inexplicably floating in the front of the boat appears to be some sort of scarab or some kind of beetle.
That there is.
The entire image is very two-dimensional, very flat, very well apportioned. This dung beetle of sorts appears to be way too big, about the size of a poodle, and just sort of in a single dimension floating above the top of the boat. Does that suit the needs of the listener to tell the story of this image? I
think you've nailed it perfectly. You've created a word picture for them, and so I'm sure they have a good idea of what we got going forward. Yes. That was the Ankh, which is the symbol of life that he's got, and he's got the symbol of the ruler. And I will point that scarab is a depiction of another version of Ra. So I said Ra likes to hyphenate, and there's a version of him, Khepri Re, in which his falcon head has been replaced by a scarab.
Interesting.
And it's not the head of the scarab, but is the whole scarab.
The whole thing. Yeah.
The whole thing is now his face. So, and that is how he appeared. That's his morning look.
Yes.
That's how he gets up in the morning.
That's good luck.
Scarab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite an outfit.
There it is. So, so at some point after this, that hand that started everything, which he's regrown apparently, but that hand, the hand of Atum, is transformed into a goddess consort of Autumn Ray. So I think we're probably better off just leaving the implications of that for pharaonic Egypt's gender roles alone for now. But that is how they styled it.
Yes.
And Autumn Ray goes on to create 80 different gods. He also gives Tefnut and Shu additional roles as Truth and the Life Giver, respectively. And, depending on which methodology you believe in, he's either just naming these things and he's creating them, or the gods are actually being created out of his sweat.
Oh.
And Ra was also responsible for creating humans in most of the Egyptian myths. And when we finally get to that, the story is that Shu and Tefnut, who are his beloved children, wandered away from Ra one day. And Ra freaks out a little bit. He's deciding, he's got to find them. And the method he chooses to do this is he's going to detach his eye and send his detachable eye flying out there to look for them.
Right. He's very comfortable. He doesn't want to get up. And if the eye detaches and does the job for you, why not outsource?
Yeah. And apparently the eye flies and he does not have this ability. But I would say he is also at this point was a Cyclops.
Oh.
So
he only had one eye. And
he had the one eye.
Dispatching it elsewhere, rendering him sightless for the period, I would assume.
Well, he was, but then he decides to this was maybe short-sighted, so to speak. So he creates himself another eye.
Yes, he's like, I could just do that. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm the creator god.
Yeah,
I can do that. So he does that, and that way he can scroll on his phone or whatever while he's waiting. And they still weren't back, so he begins to worry and perhaps to cry. And in another version, he doesn't cry then, but he sheds tears of joy at the return of his children when they are finally returned. And then lastly, there's a third version where it is the eye of Ra that gets upset when it sees that it's been replaced by another eye.
Oh, sure.
It's a little jealous. But from whatever the source, whether it's sadness, joy, or anger, it is from those tears that the first humans were born.
Oh, wow.
So the humans are born from the tears of Ra.
Unclear if they were happy tears, sad tears.
Yeah, maybe some combination.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the takeaways, here is that Ra's eye is detachable, which we're just going to keep coming up. Has a bit of a mind of its own.
Right.
And two, that creation of humans was a byproduct of an unfortunate event with either tears of joy or sadness.
Right.
So, after creating the earth, humans, the gods, the plants, the animals, there was a period where Ra just ruled the earth directly. He's created everything, and now he's just ruling from down on the ground. And at this time, there's no such thing as death. But the strain of creating the universe and then ruling the earth directly, probably settling a lot of petty disputes among the first humans, a lot of
Sure.
Judge Judy kind of action.
Right.
It starts taking its toll on him, and Ross starts showing his age, but in kind of a unique way. And this ends up leading to some turmoil. So I'm going to quote from a text known as the Book of the Heavenly Cow.
I will allude to that later on as well.
Yes.
Classic.
So this is kind of the start. It is a classic of the genre. So in the book it says, when he had been in kingship over mankind and gods combined, mankind proceeded to contrive a plot against the person of Re. And now his majesty had grown old, his bones being silver, his flesh of gold, his hair of genuine lapis lazuli. So, yeah, interesting aging process. But
yeah, that sounds pretty nice, actually, pretty flattering.
Yeah, but the humans weren't having it because his majesty became aware of the plot being contrived against him by mankind. And so his majesty said to those who were in his retinue, please summon to me my eye. And then he gets a whole list of primordial gods that he wants summoned, and it is stealthily that you must bring them, lest mankind see and they lose heart. As you come back with them to the palace so that they may offer their sound advice. So he knows there's a plot, and he calls to advise a council, and Ra calls on the advice of his council for a volunteer to take the role of the Eye of Ra to put this rebellion down. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that because I think that might be covered a little bit later.
Indeed.
But I will say that it did not go too well for the rebels.
No.
A bit of a spoiler. But in the aftermath of this rebellion and it being put down, Ra decides that it is maybe, in fact, time for him to take a step back. And he and those primordial creators decide they're going to retreat from the earth. He leaves some younger gods in place to keep the humans in line. But, he can't go into full retirement. He still needs to do the job of being the sun. Only now he's going to do it in the sky. So up to this point, the sun has just been walking around about 6.5 feet above the earth, 6 inches above his head.
Right.
But now they're just going to get some overhead lighting. So a little bit of an improvement.
Sure.
And he does this. He's going to take a cruise of sorts. He, along with the other creator gods, take what is called the solar barge through the sky every day. And each deity that goes with him is taking a role protecting or guiding the boat. But again, this takes a toll on Ra. As he ages every day and being an old man by the evening, only to be reborn every morning parthenogenically via his granddaughter Nut, the goddess of the sky. But of course, as we saw with Helios, he's gone east to west, and now he needs to get back to the east by morning. But for Ra, the day trip is nothing really compared to the night trip, which is a very wild ride. So Ra has another boat for that, specially made, which is called the Bark of Millions, or the Barge of Millions. Because this boat has to go through the underworld. So he does the day trip in the sky, and then he goes underground, the underworld, the land of the dead, land of dreams, or what the Egyptians called the Duat.
Right.
And so luckily for us, there was an hour-by-hour account of Ra's nightly journey placed on the walls of many pharaonic tombs. And collectively, this is called the Amduat, or the Book of What is in the Underworld.
Hmm.
And I'm going to give you kind of a highlight summary here. And I do want to note that I'm relying partially on the fantastic podcast, The History of Egypt by Dominic Perry.
Hmm.
And he has a longer, more detailed, and undoubtedly more accurate account that you should definitely check out if you're interested in his episode 82.
Hmm.
But yeah, so this is how this goes. So the first hour is kind of a party. So it's dark in the underworld during the day while Ra is in our sky. And so his light and energy come back to the underground and the Knothic gods, and they wake up and with Ra's return, and they line the underground riverbanks and cheer his procession. And his bodyguards then also assemble on the boat. So just kind of a big homecoming. Everybody's happy with that first hour. Second hour, he passes through these fields where the souls of the blessed dead are. And this is a fertile, kind of paradise-ish part of the underworld for those souls who got a passing grade at judgment. And it is kind of a pass-fail system.
Yeah.
From everything I saw. And so Ra confers light and energy on them to sustain them in their afterlife. Then the third hour, Ra visits the palace of the god of the dead, Osiris, who we're certainly going to meet later.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like this moment that gets depicted on the walls where their eyes meet and they give each other kind of a little knowing masculine head nod to renew their alliance. Like, yeah, let's go kick some demon serpent butt. and Ra's entourage continues to grow with his snake-headed bodyguards. And so then, that's what they do in hours 4 and 5 is kick some demon serpent butt. But there's a slight problem with this because the area they come to now is a desert called the Land of Sokar. And so the boat is now a hindrance. Instead of sailing on the boat, it is being pulled by his bodyguards across the sand, all while fighting off giant flying snakes with human legs.
Wow.
So action packed.
And this is happening
again,
every night.
That's right. This is every night.
Wow.
And so, you would think at some point they would have come up with something like a cart system or wheels. But they stick with the dragging. And they've been doing it, longer than I have. So maybe that works for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and then the fifth hour, they're still in the desert area, but then they also come on a crossroads, which is a area which bends space and time. And it gets like a little summary of their whole journey. And Ra kind of stares into the crossroads, and it gives them a little renewal, little more energy. And then the sixth hour, finally, they get back onto the water. But this is the infinite water of the Nun again. And Ra has to travel to the bottom of this primeval lake. And he goes deep below the water, and he sees a body. And he realizes it's a corpse. Now, who do you think that corpse is?
Himself.
It is himself. That is
nice.
Right. None other than himself. So every night, Ra comes face to face with his own potential death. And then he has to go through some sort of ceremony to reunite with his corpse. And he gets a little coaching. Like all the dead pharaohs appear, and the god of wisdom appears in the form of a baboon. And they coach him through this ceremony of uniting with his corpse. So now he's re-energized, he's ready to go, which is good because the seventh hour is the greatest test, where he comes across the snake god of destruction, Apophis. And I will note that Apophis was often equated with Typhon, who was the great snake enemy of Zeus.
Sure.
Season 1. But every night, Ra faces Apophis, and apparently Apophis' usual play is to use his body like sandbars to try and stop the ship, in order to then hypnotize Ra into stopping his journey, and therefore stopping the sun from rising. But Ra has his bodyguards, and they bind Apophis, and then other bodyguards stab him. allowing the boat to pass. So it's been through kind of his the biggest test of the evening. And now hours 8, 9, and 10 are actually relatively uneventful. And Ra, you know, he passes out some clothes to some other naked gods, apparently. The thing he does. He has a little cocktail hour for some of his supporters. And then in hour 10, he tends to the bodies of Egyptians who had been newly drowned. To make sure they get a shot of an afterlife, because apparently this is for the Egyptians. This is a bad way to go.
Yeah,
and it could put at risk your shot at an afterlife. But Ra takes care of it.
nice.
There every night in hour 10. So gives a little ceremony to help them out. Then the 11th hour, they start the preparation for the ritual of re-entering the sky and the coming of the dawn. And then the 12th hour, all the souls of the blessed dead rejoin Ra. And since we saw them last, both the souls of the dead and Ra have aged and all now look quite old. So again, he's aged in one night, but don't worry, because Ra is going to set everything back to right as he is reborn.
Right.
To allow the blessed dead also to be reborn. So this is a feature of the Egyptian afterlife, is that you are reborn every night and live a full life every single night. But he has one more challenge in doing this, because in order to do this, he has to travel through what is known as the World Encircler Serpent. And the World Encircler Serpent is just as advertised. It is a serpent who circles the entire world. And so by doing this, Ra will reverse the night's aging process and be reborn as Khepri Ra, the scarab beetle, newborn son. And again, he's reversing the aging process, going back in time, so to speak. So obviously you can't do that the front way. You have to go the back way. So he goes through the anus of the serpent.
Oh my.
And along with all the blessed dead, and then is reverse peristalsis vomited out the mouth, propelled into the sky and onto the solar barge as either a baby or a beetle, ready for the day's trip and to start it all over again.
Interesting.
And
now, and this is happening every night. So you
every night,
those serpents, those battle tactics, the idea of sort of making a sandbar to get in the way of the barge, and yet the enemies never win. I mean,
no,
Ra wins every night, and the sun comes up. So I'm reminded of like the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters, where like there have to be an opposing team, but that opposing team can never really win because he's the Globetrotters.
Yeah, well, if the sun doesn't come up, we'll know.
That's it. That's how we'll know. Yeah,
we'll know. Oh, yeah, they got one.
Well, talk about a work ethic. That's an astounding 24-hour calendar.
Yeah, and so there we have him, Autumn Ray, the god of the sun, the father of the gods, the king of the gods, and the predecessor of the pharaohs. His daily journey through the sky and the underworld.
Action-packed, and all the visual elements of that image really came to life, from the boat to the beetle. It was all there. The eye, a lot of foreshadowing. Fascinating. Well, one of the things I think we'll learn in this season is that many of these elements of ancient Egyptian tradition have multiple tellings, some that have some variations on the theme. So I think we'll hear in the second segment of this program a slightly different take on what that journey looks like. From the point of view of another important character. So stay tuned for that. Well, why don't we just take our first break there, I think, and just, process all that very vibrant imagery you've just given us. And be back right after the break with second section with Hathor.
Sounds good.
All right. And we are back. Season 2, episode 1. We've covered Ra the first half. Well done, Andrew. And now we're going to get to the second contestant in this episode, who is, and I had to really train myself to pronounce this. On good authority of the internet, it is pronounced Hathor.
Oh.
So Hathor. So if you, as a little device for myself, it's pronounced in a similar way to the legendary news anchor Dan Rather, or the less legendary Leave It to Beaver star Jerry Mathers. So in the same way that you, I mean, it's hard because you see Thor, you associate a god, and you think, oh, it's, hey Thor, like the god of thunder is crossing. Hey Thor, how's it going? So I had to train myself to get it right. In the same way that you heroically did that in our Demeter episode, second episode of the first season. I've really tried hard to keep it to Hathor. So that is the mother of the sky. Now I'm going to turn that trick back on you, Andrew. I'm going to show you
excellent.
An image of Hathor. Let me know when you see it.
I do.
Okay.
I
and
see
can you describe for our non-visual listeners what you see in this image?
So we have a lady standing in a fairly awkward position where her shoulders are facing one way and her hips another way.
Right.
And her face is in profile.
Yes.
She again has that sun with a snake around it, but
That's
then
right.
also it's sort of sitting in two prongs, instead of just floating above her head, and the prongs are maybe in a pot that is on her head. She has the same symbols. She has the Ankh and the scepter.
Yeah.
And she's standing in a lovely orange dress and looking quite regal, but also composed.
That's very well described and very accurately done. I think one of the things, part of why we want to get into the imagery of this is that, any casual follower of ancient Egypt knows there's a certain iconography, kind of a visual style to that era. And of course, because they were wonderful artists back then who captured a lot of these images in a very prescribed style in places like tombs and inside pyramids and things, we have a lot of very good evidence about what that iconography looked like. So you kind of mentioned the sort of profile, the sort of looking sideways, stiff and striding, always moving forward, kind of in two dimensions. I learned the left foot is always going going first in the stride. Okay. That is a show of strength. That is the side the heart is on. That is intentional. The body, though, is as you say, it's sort of facing the viewer, but the head is in profile. This is known as aspective view, where you can see the body as though they were facing you, but very pronounced sort of profile. The eye very pronounced with very sweeping. It's a very intentional choice. The Egyptians didn't, they wanted to represent the figure, but not give a realistic view. They were more interested in saying, here are some images that we associate with this figure. It will not necessarily look like the figure, but with those visual cues, you'll be able to know, oh, there's the sun, there's the rod, there's the staff. It must be so-and-so. So a different style of artistic rendering. And I think why they did it, at least the theory that I came across, is where when we saw in a lot of the other traditions, particularly all the way through the Renaissance, art is intending to capture a moment in time and capture realistically what's happening in that moment. The Egyptians thought about it as eternal. So every image they created was for the long haul. So it would be timelessly captured in any era that you looked at that image. You would see the same iconography, the same style. So very intentional there, but pretty interesting. So you identified correctly. There's a little bit of turquoise in that dress. You identified the staff, the ankh. The beaded necklace is there, of course. The ankh is interesting because, and I didn't know this, it's sort of, and you'll viewers or listeners will recognize it's sort of a cross, but like with a bit of a tear-shaped hoop at the top.
Right.
And that, of course, as you said, not just the symbol for eternal life in ancient Egypt, but the actual hieroglyphic word for life. And it is the first cross. So for all of you who think Jesus really put the cross on the map, ancient Egyptians way ahead of him had it down for thousands of years beforehand. So think again. So Hathor, one of the original deities very early on in generations, associated with a little bit of everything. So as I said, primarily the goddess and the mother of the sky. And a little bit of everything to Ra. This is where it gets kind of complicated because Ra's daughter, but also his mother in a strange way because of what we'll talk about in terms of that cycle of rebirth. Certainly Ra's consort, and also in certain moments his employee. So we'll talk about that unconventional relationship in some detail here. The maternal side is the strongest. So Hathor is thought to be the mother of the pharaohs, Those, of course, are going to be the representation of the gods on earth who rule Egypt over all these centuries. So Hathor is thought to be that mother and is often accompanied in imagery as the mother figure. So you told the story of the Eye of Ra, and you kind of gave the literal interpretation of the eye being displaced, doing the looking,
right,
when his children were missing. There's a different kind of articulation in that, where there are certain females who become the female form of Ra that is called the Eye of Ra. So less literal, but the Eye of Ra becomes, you kind of assume that form at Ra's command, and you do that when he wants you to kind of exact revenge against his enemies. So it requires these. So they take on a female takes on the form, a female deity. It requires them to have a bit of a darker edge, to take on, the bit of the darker side of their personality. And the Eye of Ra becomes this kind of little elite squad, kind of an all-female Secret Service crossed with like the lady assassins from Kill Bill, like a hit squad.
Ra's Angels.
Ra's Angels, exactly. Yes. So Hathor was kind of the star of the Eye of Ra, of a common practitioner of that assignment. Now, you mentioned a few symbols. On the good side, Hathor her beneficent side had many, many big good things. We're talking the goddess of music, dance, joy, love, sexuality. Kind of what I imagine to be a typical Tuesday at your house, just all rolled into one. Mostly the maternal care, the mother to the sons of many of the gods, all about fertility, considered not just the model of fertility, but the model of femininity throughout Egypt. So that's why we see her as often the mother and the wife of the king. Her other consort, Horus, was also said to be the sire of all those pharaohs going on down. So the bloodline continues from the top. One thing, when you think about, being the goddess of the sky and the celestial aspect of where she spends her time, but also the maternal aspect, there's a natural symbol that comes to mind that would really symbolize what she is. And wouldn't you know it, that's the cow. Now, that when you mentioned the horns on the top of her headdress, those are actually intended to symbolize the horns of the cow. Now, okay. I don't know about you, Andrew. I often see the cow as a relatively simple creature, kind of dim-witted, suitable, if you're here in the Midwest, suitable for tipping, for entertainment purposes. But really less of a sacred creature, more of a sort of a pre-hamburger, kind of a future steak to me. But it's worth reminding listeners that cows were venerated in many cultures, including ancient Egypt. And in fact, in some places of the world still are today. Nowhere that I spend much of my time. My travels are far too sort of beef forward for that, but it is still a thing. But because Hathor is associated with motherhood and with nourishment, of course, the cow is the provider of milk, provides calves with milk. In fact, for that purpose, I have poured myself a little shot of milk here to toast you. So that would have been better about an hour ago, but a great symbol. And also had a few other symbols associated with it. The lioness, basically her feminine strength, the cobra, we saw that on the headdress, the vengeance, the danger, the dark side, and the sycamore tree, the sort of milky sap, the symbol of life. So lots of symbols, lots of associations. Also has this sort of sense of multiplicity. So not only a wide variety of roles for Hathor, but also multiple versions, multiple manifestations. So some of those ancient texts refer to what they call the 7 Hathors, typically depicted, as you can imagine, 7 different cows that were sort of different versions of her. In some writings, there are as many as 362 Hathors. So one for almost every day of the year. Yeah. But gets a few days off, I guess, or you do a rerun that night, or you bring in a guest host. But because there's so many different versions, there are some scholars who see Hathor is less a single entity, more of a type of deity, more of like a category, like a hive being, so in the same sense that you go to Vegas, you're going to see multiple Elvis impersonators.
Right.
They're all kind of a hive. Or sports fans from Philadelphia, technically different people, but all just one incarnation of terrible, no matter what the sport is. So the mother of the sky, you alluded to the sort of the bark, the boat that takes the solar journey every day.
Right.
That's where she spends her days with Ra and the other celestial deities, the entourage that you mentioned. And the boat kind of gets to this, that Egyptian concept of the sky, a little bit different than ours, much more like a body of water in which the sun god Ra was to sail every day. It makes sense. In a lot of their creation myths, the sun actually came from the water. So there's a really close connection between those two. You alluded to Helios from our first season, and of course his sky chariot, sort of the aqua version of that, if you like. But as you mentioned, rather than this sort of daily celestial commute, the Egyptians would see the sky as a symbol of the cycle of life and rebirth. So this is where our two accounts differ a little bit. From the perspective of Hathor, because she is the maternal symbol of fertility, it is her job to give birth to the sun each day at dawn. So the old fashioned way, like giving birth to the sun. And you think about that for a moment. Giving birth every day is enough, but doing it that early, I mean, you would not want to be a morning person. That would take a great deal of strength. So it's her job to expel the sun out of her every morning, maybe even before coffee, which makes it even worse. And because of that, she held a number of other titles besides Mother of the Sky. She was known as Lady of the Offering, the Lady of Contentment for some reason, and Lady of the Vulva, which I think is quite the title for your business card. So every day starts with Hathor giving birth to the sun. And then, of course, as you mentioned, she accompanies Ra throughout the day in his divine entourage through the sky in that bark. She's known as the Golden One. But as the day progresses, according to this telling, the journey changes. And by the time, so there's the relationship changes. There's an aging that happens, I think, in Ra. And by the time the voyage is complete at sunset, the sun is going to dip into the water. Now, the Egyptians saw that sunset as the sun god Ra entering the body of the sky goddess. So essentially, she started the day giving birth to the sun, and she's closing the day by getting busy with the sun. But again, this is the cycle of life. So the day ends with the sun god impregnating Hathor and fathering the deities that will be born from her womb the next day. And those deities are himself as the sun, and the eye goddess, which is Hathor, as the eye of Ra. And I have to keep looking at this sentence again and again. Ra gives rise to his daughter, the eye goddess, who in turn gives rise to him, her son. Constant regeneration happens every day. And we joked a lot in season one. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like the Egyptians never saw Back to the Future.
They invented many great things, but I think that was a little later. That's right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we joked a lot about how, in Greco-Roman style, the early gods would have to marry their sisters or their brothers because there weren't a lot of options. And I would always make the joke, well, it was complicated. This mother, son, father situation is 100 times more complicated than I can think of. So later on in the tradition, the New Kingdom is kind of the latter era of ancient Egyptian history. And Ra, the sun god, became associated with the epithet Hamutef, bull of his mother. So as Kamutef, he was seen as the son and husband of Hathor, who impregnates his own mother to give birth to himself. And back, Andrew, when you and I were in college, this is before cannabis was invented, so that wasn't an issue. But if it had been invented, I can see us sitting for hours trying to wrap our minds around that celestial cycle and try to diagram it, try to think it through. But it's mind-blowing. So
yeah, that's confusing.
A multifaceted relationship, to say the least. So I mentioned the darker side. Now, in her capacity as the Eye of Ra, it was Hathor's duty often to protect him against Ra's enemies. And so she had a form called the Hathor of Four Faces, kind of a cool move. She would have four faces, each face staring in a different direction, one north, south, east, and west, to constantly scan for threats. And when she was dispatched as the Eye of Ra, Hathor could get really wrathful. I mean, we're talking like, Hera from season one, almost at that level. Pretty good. And also quite the 180 from her normal reputation as this sort of the mother figure, this pleasant cow goddess, this lover of dancing. And what you alluded to earlier, the Book of the Heavenly Cow, one of these particular myths where she really shines. And I thank you for sort of stopping short of telling that story, because I think you knew it was coming. So you teed it up. Ra is displeased at how decadent the world has become. He knows that there's humans who are starting to rebel. He doesn't appreciate that. So he sends Hathor, as in her capacity as Eye of Ra, to exact some punishment. And she decides to become Sekhmet, which is the lioness goddess, so a female lion. Pretty good choice if you're going to put down some unruly humans. That's, take on a form like that. And boy, does she take the assignment seriously. She just starts, as the lioness, starts massacring humans left and right. even Ra, who is the god of gods, is a little bit taken aback. Like, whoa,
Yeah.
that said, tone it down. So the other gods start to talk them, and they all kind of come to Ra and say, hey, man, you might want to have her pump the brakes a little bit. This is,
Right.
we don't want to eliminate the humans, just slow them down. So in response to the situation, this suddenly very stressful situation, Ra does
Right.
what many of us would do, and he orders some beer, which is a great
Yes.
reminder that, that I often forget the Egyptians invented beer. I'm
Yes, they
eternally
did.
grateful for that. I'm especially grateful now that I've had a shot of warm milk instead. But he makes two requests. Ra tells the brewers, all right, I want this beer made with extra alcohol. So, not just like a lager. This needs to be like a strong ale. And dye the beer the color red and pour it all across the land. And so the brewers get to work. They do this. And Hathor immediately sees the red beer all across the land and gets distracted. She pauses her massacre in progress of the humans and approaches the beer. And I love this detail, and just starts to slurp it because she thinks it's blood. Like, that's how committed she is
She's
to
gone.
this security. Yeah, she's so committed to the state of wrath. Like, oh, blood, great, I'm in. So as a result, drinks several gulps of this strong red beer at once, becomes inebriated, and just passes out for 3 straight days. So when she wakes up, Hathor has reverted back to the beautiful, benign goddess that we all know and love. So it was like nothing ever happened after a little bit of red beer and 3 days of sleeping it off. So it's a good symbol of how these two aspects of Hathor, the sort of being violent and dangerous one minute, but beautiful and joyful the next, really reflects this idea of Egyptian women, according to some scholars. There's one Egyptologist who says encompassing both extreme passions of fury and love, and that's built into every Egyptian woman, according to some scholars. So this event clearly is a great candidate to be celebrated in festivals later on. So when you're getting together to worship Hathor, they do it all up. They dye their beer red. The worshipers, they drink a lot of it. Hathor was also the goddess of drunkenness, had a sort of proto-Dionysian streak.
Yeah.
Probably no small effect because of this story. So they would drink a lot of the beer. They would reminisce about the story that started it all. And hey, Hathor, remember that time you turned into a lion, almost killed all of us, but the red beer saved us.
Yeah.
Cheers to that. You want a couple more? Yeah, let's keep them coming. Let's not let that happen again. So let's get your refill. So, a lot of credit in this story. I give credit to Ra for being really creative in his management of the whole thing. Being able to sort of to pivot on the fly when the situation got a little worse than he expected. Incredible dedication to the role by Hathor to really commit as the lioness. And, hats off to what could have been the invention of red ale, such as, leading thousands of years later to Killian's red, which most certainly was invented by the time we got to college. And we were the beneficiaries of it. So there's also, I mentioned this up front, there's a sexual component to her mythos as well. She's got this ecstatic feminine power of procreation, but there's also a real erotic charge. She's pictured as a beautiful woman, often scantily clad, often compared to Aphrodite from the Greco-Roman tradition, the embodiment of beauty and love. And she does play a role. And again, our accounts will differ slightly here, but I think they're coming from the same place in creating the world itself. So you talked about Atum, the creator God who contained all things within himself. And, you really bent over backwards to describe that origin story in family-friendly terms. But, I think where I see a similarity, to get Shu and Tefnut born, there were no women around, just Atum. So he had to, as I'm calling it, just start the process himself. But the hand that he used to accomplish that, the hand of Atum, that, quote, played the female role when no females were around, well, that became personified by Hathor. So she became known not as the hand in the moment, but essentially came to represent the hand of the creator a little bit later, as she grew up down the road. So, already putting together a very impressive resume. You've got the eye of the sun god, you've got the lady of the vulva, and the frisky hand of the creator, all rolled into one figure. There is another amusing and kind of odd tale from the New Kingdom, the contendings of Horus and Set. And we won't go through all the detail because it's a weird one. And I imagine we'll dip into it maybe a little bit later in the season. But
for sure.
There is a moment, where Ra is insulted by another god, and I think you may have alluded to him, Babi, who is a baboon god. So it's one thing to be insulted by another god, but a baboon god, I mean, that's just that's going to rub you. It's going to hit extra hard. So Ra gets very upset. And you have to remember, Ra is so powerful that essentially all of life and order were dependent on his activity, even his mood. So he's so upset, he lies on his back for a while, fuming and just sort of contemplating his next move. And in lying back, it's suggested in some of these myths that if he lies back for too long, he would slip into this kind of inert state, which would cause the end of the world. Because if there's no Ra, there's no world. So it's a dangerous moment. He's so fuming, lies back, almost inert. But in the nick of time, sure enough, good old Hathor comes along. She brings her saucy side, and to, I guess, cheer him up, exposes her genitals to him. Now, this gets Ra's attention, and his response is laughter. He and nobody knows why. It's never been explained why laughter was the response, but he laughs, shakes it off, shakes his head, and just gets back to work as ruler of the gods. So in that moment, the implication, according to interpretations of this, is that if not for Hathor flashing him in that moment, very dark things could have transpired in the history of the world, and anything could have happened. But instead, he just gets an eyeful, he gets a chuckle, gets back to business, and starts doing his job of administering justice again. So we don't know exactly what he was thinking in that moment. And let's face it, it's always a risky proposition when you're flashed to respond with laughter. But in this case, for all of us, everything did work out in the end. So you made some allusions as well to the afterlife and the sort of rebirth nature of the underworld in the Egypt tradition. And Hathor has a place in that too. So she was kind of one of these sort of liminal boundary figures, would cross boundary and literal boundaries outside of Egypt to be worshipped elsewhere, but also slip between the living and the dead, the duat that you mentioned. And boy, I mean, I think we both probably have a lot to learn about the kind of nuances of the Egyptian underworld, but it's a lot different than the underworld that you and I covered in season 1. It sounds pretty nice, actually. I mean, like the journey you talked about goes into some of the less savory components of it, but
it's got some nicer districts.
Well, I'll tell you, Hathor was working in a good neighborhood, because when she would go down there, she was really a guide to those souls who were seeking to be taken from one world to the next. So, your casket really was less about dying, much more about a vessel to be born somewhere else. And naturally, because Hathor is the goddess of birth and the one who, I need not remind you, worked hard every morning to pop out the sun. She was a prime figure in that journey to the underworld. So when in images of people coming to the afterlife, she's welcoming them in. She's often seen as presiding over a beautiful garden. Not only guiding souls into the afterlife, she would prepare them food and drink, give you a little bite to eat.
Nice.
She'd even find a little shade so you'd be comfortable. So the newly dead could have milk, drink milk from the 7 cows that were the 7 Hathors. So really a far cry from the domain of Hades.
Yes.
But not only that, the afterlife in Egypt has a sexual aspect as well. So we'll hear later on about the Osiris myth and sort of his adventure there the first time, but he was murdered. And despite that, he finds a way to copulate with Isis, conceives Horus, and this act, the act of creating life, resurrects him and brings him back to life. So essentially, there becomes this tradition of, after you're dead, you can kind of shtup your way back to life if you know what you're doing. So goddesses like Isis and Hathor would also occasionally make themselves available to those souls in the underworld to rouse them back to life, to stimulate them back to a state of coming back. And you talk about giving back to your community. I mean, that's just providing selfless service. And if that's not, I don't know what is. So a far cry from what we saw in the Greco-Roman tradition. By comparison to that, the Egyptian underworld, not bad at all. Not this dark place of misery and torture. It's like a pleasant sort of bucolic little kind of a sex spa where sometimes you have such a good time, you get a full second chance at life. So those are the kind of faces of our Hathor here. Beloved, associated with these great things, beauty, love, and music, but also complex, has this dark side, the Eye of Ra kind of a assassin whose wrath could be only tempered by red ale, apparently. Devoted mother, daughter, consort to Ra all at once, depending on what time of day you're talking about. And yet unbound in her sexual appetites, whether she is saving the world by, flashing her husband / son, I guess, or serving in the creation myth as in the quite literal sense, the hand of the king. So Quite a tale for one of
Yes.
those early contestants, but pretty good case that Hathor's got some skills to bring to this competition.
Definitely does. That is
All right.
fascinating. A lot of that I had not come across, but it's going to make for some interesting rounds as we come up here.
That it will.
Great job.
Well, I'm going to pour this warm milk out and prepare for those 5 categories right on the other side of this break.
Excellent. And we are back for our rounds. We have 5 rounds, and the first one, as always, is Immortal Combat, where we decide who would win in a physical confrontation, either one-on-one or with their entourages. And I'm going to start off, because this is an interesting one. And I mentioned, is it one-on-one? Is it with the entourage? And I listened back a little bit to season 1, and early last season, we said it was more of a one-on-one battle, but then kind of as the season went on, we started to give more weight to the entourage element. So we are, nothing if not consistent.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an issue that we have to discuss, because Raw had kind of the ultimate entourage.
Yeah.
He had a very formidable entourage with him on that boat. But the real problem is that Hathor is a big part of that entourage.
Yeah. It's a murderer's row of actual murderers.
Yeah. And arguably she was the most important part of his fighting entourage. So then you get the question is whether Hathor could beat Hathor in a fight.
Yeah. Yeah. And since there were as many as 362 Hathors, there are ways of finding out.
Yeah, there would be. Yes.
Sort of some sort of cow on cow battle, I guess would be.
Yes. But when we look at the one-on-one side of it, which may be a little bit easier to sort out, really his go-to move was to remove that eye and set it loose on his enemies.
Sure.
Surprising that it's not something we've seen in the Marvel universe yet, but I guess give them time. And this gets into the issue of Rod doesn't really tend to fight his own battles in most of the stories that I came across.
He's a delegator. He
has that entourage.
Yeah.
Every single night he takes on the serpent god Apophis, but Rod really doesn't do the fighting. He's got a whole army of snake-headed deities to do that for him.
Right.
It's always that entourage.
Yes.
Now, in those creation powers, I would think there would be some potential, like he could just say, "There's an anvil above your head."
Yes.
And there would be.
If he still has that ability, if that has not gone away,
yeah,
he come in really handy.
Yeah, he doesn't really do that anymore, but that is one way he could do it. And then again, obviously, he's usually depicted with a sun with a snake around his head, hovering over his head. But like Helios, there's no story of him using that sun power in battle to vanquish his enemies. He doesn't ever just fry those flying snakes with the power of the sun. So I think there's something holding him back from doing that. And so it's an interesting he's an interesting character in this round. So what do you have for Hathor?
Well, similarly, we don't get a ton of information about Hathor's powers, but we know that she could be very fierce when serving in the capacity as the Eye of Ra. Right. And I think the one data point we do have is that she turned into a lion and had to be forcibly stopped from murdering all of humanity. So
yes,
that's a pretty good indication that when she's in the mood for a fight, she commits to it. I'm especially impressed that even with, she could squeeze in those bouts of wrath and vengeance, all while still raising a family, holding down a full-time job, somehow managing to give birth and endure a very long commute every day. Like that's packing a lot into a schedule. So
yeah, she had it
in the same way that Ra was quite accomplished over his 24-hour calendar. Hathor was too, committed. You mentioned the kind of the hard part about it. The trick is in this instance, she would be fighting Ra. himself, her, her not just consort and son and,
Father.
lover, but also employer, who is really in
Right.
charge of he's the Charlie to her Angel. Then again, in a pinch, we know she has the secret weapon of disarming him by flashing her genitals, which is a weapon
No,
of
that's
sorts.
true.
So
That's
it
true.
did work once before. Now it got him to laugh and just get back to work. It wasn't necessarily a fatal blow. So
Right.
I think no disrespect to the power of Hathor. I think, but just as the god of gods, I think Ra still calls the shots and ultimately is still, in his service, anything she's going to pull off. So I think he still gets my vote for who would win if a confrontation had to happen.
Right. Well, when you get to the red ale story, she's very fierce and everything, but she did kind of lose it a little bit, and
that's true.
He used his guile to not, to calm her down in that case, but he did use his guile to sort of change her course. And I think maybe I think that's enough for me to give it to Ra as well.
Yeah. And even then was delegating, because he did not brew the beer himself. He just sort of art directed the process. All right, want to do this, want a little bit more color here, and I want you to put it there. Guys, you take it from here.
Right. Yes, that is true. He was not brewing the beer. That is accurate. Which you ever thought he could have just created it. Maybe that is evidence the creator thing has gone away, or he's out of shape on that.
Out of shape. Maybe you lose something in the body of the beer. Maybe just a little more aftertaste when you just conjure it out of thin air. So let the brewers do their craft. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah. If she killed a few thousand more while that's being brewed up.
Yes.
What are you gonna do?
It wasn't a limitless supply of patience, but it was just enough to get the job done.
Right. What are you gonna do? All right, so I think we're both going to go with Ra on that one. So the score is 1-0 for Ra, and this brings us to round 2, which is curriculum deity, and this is the dual track. Which god would you rather be? Which god would you rather worship? Who has that it factor?
Right,
and let you take the lead on this one.
So yeah, B is Hathor makes a good case because she's kind of the best of all possible worlds. She's really good at everything, like Apollo, associated with love and beauty like Aphrodite, has a rocking good time like Dionysus. Has that dark side, but also in time people were cool about it and they would raise a glass to it. So even that was sort of forgiven despite the murderous rage. Uses the afterlife kind of like almost like her summer home in the Hamptons, entertaining people on their way in, having a little bit of a garden party over here, sort of having a little orgy over here to bring people back to life. So a lot of good qualities that I would like to inhabit myself. Then again, she is represented by a sacred cow, and I would have to adjust my beef eating habits, which might be a bridge too far. Right. Also, having to give birth every morning, that sounds like a lot of work. So I don't miss having a commute every day the way she has it, but that's asking a lot. So losing some points, a great deal of respect to any mother who does it once, let alone every day for thousands of years, but not enviable for me to compensate for the rest of those. So mixed bag on being. In terms of worshiping, Hathor had more temples than any of the other goddesses in Egypt. Dendera in Upper Egypt was the most prominent. There was, I think you may have mentioned, there was a crocodile god who had the place first, but she shooed him away. Only time in history that a cow has overtaken a crocodile. That will not happen anytime soon. Also had a major cult center in Lower Egypt in the town of Memphis, which I did not realize was originally Egypt. So I said, well, where does it end? Did the Egyptians play a role in inventing barbecue? Was Elvis Egyptian? But no, it was a different place. Hathor was also worshipped in the temples of her male consorts. So even if she had a very powerful consort that she spent time with, she had a place in that temple as well to get to show some of her pull. Took the show on the road, went to foreign lands outside of Egypt, Nubia, Canaan, got worshipped there as well. We talked about the festivals with the music, the garlands, dancing, drunkenness, plus flowers and incense. So had the rare treat of a music festival that actually smelled good, which is very rare, and fitting because she was also the not just the lady of the vulva, but also the lady of fragrance. So all good smells come from Hathor at the beginning. At these festivals, I did learn people would play an instrument called the sistrum, which is this sort of rattle-like instrument, which had a lot of erotic connotations. And would you like to hear what the sistrum sounded like? Yeah, so it's a little something like this.
Okay.
I'm not hearing a lot of erotic charge out of this, but apparently it was a very different time. Barely even a pulse. Sounds more like just sort of a scraping of a spoon on a washboard. But in any case, it worked. It did the trick, and people really loved those parties. So, as a side note, she was also prayed to privately by women who were seeking children. So that maternal aspect, beyond the partying, beyond the murderous rage, also played a pivotal role in mothers who wanted to have children. There is an aspect to the afterlife, and this shows up in both two ancient texts, the coffin texts and the Book of the Dead, which had spells that would allow people to help a deceased loved one become a follower of Hathor in the afterlife. So this was the thing where, your status in the afterlife was dependent on how those who loved you in the earth who were still alive, they could do things to affect where you ended up. So there were specific spells you could walk through that would get you on Hathor's good side. So you'd not only be welcomed into her sort of afterlife spa, but also potentially become a super fan if they told the spells in the proper way. Ultimately, she had prominence in the Old Kingdom, but by the time we got around to the New Kingdom, God became less and less popular, was overtaken mostly by ISIS. This is, of course, not the ISIS we are familiar with, not the sort of the irritating, little brother of Al Qaeda, whatever they are. But a goddess, and we'll get more into her later. But ISIS essentially became the star of the show. But yet she still was venerated in some capacity until the Egyptian religion finally wound down in like the early centuries AD, once the Christians took over, once monotheism kicked in and sent all the polytheistic gods into hiding, where they would lie in wait for the next couple thousand years, just biding time until this podcast came around.
Exactly.
So all told, a pretty good case for worship here. Lots of options, lots of fun, lots of worshiping utility. So pretty strong case there. Mixed bag on the B.
Yep.
Pretty strong case on the worship. What about you?
All right. So an interesting one here. Depictions of Ra were pretty varied. As I noted, and the most common depiction was a man with a falcon head, which I showed you, but having a ram's head is another one. Sometimes when he's shown in the underworld, he has switched to the ram's head version. And of course, there's the scarab beetle, which either could be his head, or he could be a scarab beetle, or he could be a falcon, or a man actually with a regular head occasionally when he just wanted to get crazy.
Just to mix it up. Yeah.
Yeah, just when he wanted to get crazy. So there's a lot of, different aspects you could go through. And, and in terms of being, again, Ra's life really has kind of those two parts. There's the creator part in the beginning where you're, exercising a lot of creativity, literally. And then there's the sun god part, which is a little bit more of a grind. Maybe the creator part was a little bit lonely. It's hard to say how long he was floating around in the waters there, but then he ruled over creation directly for some time. But again, that aged him and tired him out. So he retreats to the solar barge, but that's not really much of a retirement.
No, especially not the night version. Yeah.
No, he's spending all day guiding the barge across the sky. And you notice he has to be renewed and recharged a couple times in the course of his journey. Like, at dawn, he's reborn. At dusk, he's an old man. And then at midnight, he has to merge with his corpse. It's a kind of he's running 24/7.
It really is.
In that solar bark operation. So maybe you can get a couple winks during hour 8 when he's handing out the clothes to those naked gods or whatever, but otherwise it's pretty nonstop. And we talk about Hathor having to give birth every day. He's got to be reborn every day.
Yeah, that's not easy either. Yeah.
And either he's being reborn or he's traveling the reverse way through a snake. So
yes, with a little reprieve in the middle for doing the impregnation of himself. There are certain pleasantries intermingled throughout, but the rest of it pretty harrowing.
So again, reuniting with your own corpse, not really my idea of a hobby. But he does receive adulation most places he goes. Everybody's happy to see him. He generally has a good relationship with the other deities, his children, grandchildren, parents, consorts, who are all kind of mixed up in there together. He doesn't really have, a wife. He has a number of
Right.
consorts, but and he does have a number of children, and he is, of course, for Tef, Nut, and Shu, he's styled as both the mother and father
Right.
of them. So
Yes.
he's got a lot of different relationships. And he's also got this thing where he has different aspects.
Yeah.
And where there's a version of him where he's united with Sobek, the crocodile god. There's a version of him where he's united with Horus, who's a sky god, falcon. And in fact, one tomb wall of a pharaoh listed 75 different identities for
Wow.
Ra. So that just seems kind of confusing
Yeah.
to me.
I mean,
I have trouble dealing with one identity.
yeah.
So 75 seems like a lot of work. Now, in terms of worship, there were a lot of temples of Ra, most of which were, of course, open without a roof.
That would make sense. Yeah.
You would want to see the sun. And unlike most of these temples, most of them were closed, and they had a big statue which would only come out on large ceremonial occasions. There were
Right.
very, very few, almost no statues of Ra, because worshippers would go in and then you would just look up and you would see the sun.
Yeah, it's right there. It's
Yeah,
the ultimate portability. Yeah.
Why am I looking at a statue? I can see him right now. And it's surprising there weren't a lot of festivals that were just related to Ra. I think he took part in some, but at the beginning of the year there was kind of a Greet the Sun festival. Worshippers had to get up at dawn to greet the first sunrise of the year, which not that crazy about that one.
No, it's early in the day. Yeah, no thanks.
And the big one was there's a festival of the rising of heaven, which was shortly after the winter solstice, kind of celebrate the return of Ra, the renewal of nature. Had a bit of a nature worship vibe on that one as well. But overall, he wasn't. There are many temples, but not really a lot of festivals.
Yeah.
So, it's they both have a little bit of a grind here. Actually, when you really think about it, these are some hardworking deities.
Yeah.
Which no, I don't think you could say that about, other than Helios. I don't think any of the Greek Roman gods that we we touched on could hold a candle to these guys. But I'm gonna say for me, I'm gonna go with Hathor on this one.
I am as well, and I think it is yes. I will look past the sacred cow aspect. I will look past the daily giving of birth, but purely the schedule of Ra just seems overwhelming. I mean, they're both intense, but
yeah,
and I think Hathor had a lot of good times too. That was a lot more fun. Had a lot more in the way of the sort of erotic side of things. So yeah, I think I will give Hathor my vote as well.
There's something about having a beak that's not terribly appealing to me.
I mean, I suppose in certain aspects, Hathor also had udders.
Well,
but yeah.
All right, so so it is now 1-1.
Yes,
which is a great way to start out, keeping the tension high.
That's right.
And that brings us to our third category, good God. And this is, of course, just the character round,
right.
Which deity has the better character. And here, I think I would mostly have to give a pretty good score to Ra.
Yeah.
He does a fairly good job in the creation of the world. Everything seems to work. And the Egyptians particularly were big on that. That he also created the concept of, and the goddess of, divine order, what they would call Mahat. And it was continually a battle between Mahat, or divine order, and chaos, with Ra being always on the side of divine order, sustaining life, keeping the world going, fending off chaos. And that is what that journey every night symbolizes, is the fight of the forces of order to keep the forces of chaos at bay. And it's something that has to undergo every day to keep those forces of chaos at bay.
Right.
And when he was down on the earth, he was ruling, and he gave up power of being at least the direct ruler of the earth, more or less voluntarily.
Yeah.
They had won that battle. They had defeated the humans. Weren't in a position to kick him out.
No.
But he said, "Yeah, maybe this isn't going so well." So
He knew when his time had come. Yeah.
Yeah. So I give him some points for that.
Yep.
Takes up the drudgery of the solar barge trip.
Yep.
Fighting that giant snake every night.
Yep.
And of course, during the day, shouldn't discount shedding his light and energy on us. He helps those souls who are drowned, who otherwise would be missing out on the afterlife. Gives them a little ceremony.
Which in a kingdom that has a giant river running through the middle is probably no small thing. It's a lot of drowning going on. Yeah,
I'm sure that was a fear, and he has that closed drive for the naked deities. He's got his charity.
If it were naked poor people, that's one thing. I would figure that the gods could find a way to pick up an outfit on their own, but who knows?
Maybe it's just helping them with their fashion sense. We're not really
just more curating a look than
he's a stylist, perhaps.
Yes.
But he wasn't perfect by any means. There was the Eye of Ra thing with the rebellion. You can blame Hathor for maybe taking a little too far, but he did start it. He did. He ordered the hit.
Yep.
Even though he cooled down and tried to call it off later. And there is a story of him putting a curse on a goddess who refused to sleep with him.
Oh.
We'll probably cover that later in a different episode, but certainly bad behavior, not Greco-Roman level bad behavior, but little sour grapes, not cool. So he mostly good, but some bad thrown in there.
Yeah. I think you can make a similar case for Hathor, but just at sort of a lower volume. I think there was a lot of strong, good characters showing up in yes, there was some bad stuff, as you alluded to, but even then she was essentially following orders from Ra. So just taking on the assignment, just doing her work with gusto, ultimately letting the red beer take care of it. But the rest of the time, character-wise, pretty good. I mean, great work ethic, all peace, love, and dancing, and fecundity, post-death stimulating, and lots of milk. So seem to have a pretty good time. Bonus points for the sort of service aspects of helping out in the underworld, welcoming those souls through. Yeah. Other bonus points for helping would-be mothers, kind of being a recipient of their worship and their cries for help. So clearly a good person all throughout, associated as such. I think given the volume and the sort of magnitude of Ra's expression of character, I think he still gets my vote here. But I think strong characters on both sides. Yeah, just writ large with Ra in a way that didn't quite match up with Hathor.
Well, yeah, I think the cosmic importance of that underworld journey that Ra takes every night. It was like, I got to get back to the other side of the earth and start this all over again.
Doesn't even get a day off.
No, and every night to just battle the forces of chaos for the earth to continue, and that divine order to continue to create a world for us to live in.
I mean, even Yahweh on day 7 had to be like, I got to take a break.
That's true. It's true.
No such thing for Ra. He was Sunday
a week. Sunday is a day of work for him. So yeah. I think I certainly not based on the detriments of Hathor. I think
right.
The stakes. Yeah. I gotta go with Ra as well.
Yep.
All right. So that leads us at 2-1 going into our 4th round, which is iconography. And this one is, who has the better legacy in many different aspects, which we'll discuss, but who is more with us today? So I'll let you start on this one.
Yeah, and maybe these Egyptian ones won't have the same impact as some of the Greco-Roman legacies. There's still some. It's not great compared to that first season, but there's some. So the good news for Hathor, she does have a month named after her. The bad news is it's not in our calendar. It is in the Coptic calendar, which is a 13-month calendar. which is now used only by the Coptic Orthodox Church and still by some Egyptian farmers.
Excellent.
So in that calendar, the third month is named after Hathor. It takes place, we would call it in our Gregorian calendar, between November 10th and December 9th. So for those of you keeping track at home, like that's, that you would have a single month that includes both Thanksgiving and a decent chunk of the Christmas season all in one.
All right.
Had such things been invented, or were they important to the likes of the Coptics? But still, a month is not nothing. There's an asteroid, 2340 Hathor is out there somewhere. There's a company, and a uranium exploration company in Canada called Hathor Exploration Limited, which is fitting because Hathor was, among all these other things, also the patron goddess of miners in ancient Egypt. So that's a natural fit for these good folks up in Saskatoon looking for uranium. So I wish them well, but not too well, because if Canada finds too much uranium, I don't want them building some kind of nuclear arsenal and bringing any kind of more tensions to our northern border. So
yeah,
good on you for the naming, but don't do too well, uranium miners up north. So that's kind of, there's a few songs here and there that are just sort of weird Egyptian style, instrumentals. But that's about all I could dig up for legacy.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So definitely of course the Egyptians are, as you said, a little less well known in the modern English speaking world
Right.
compared to the Egyptians. And for obvious reasons, of course, we are an English speaking focused podcast.
Yes. So far. Yeah.
Yeah. But there are some cultural influences and historical influences. And yes, maybe even a few YA fiction novels.
Oh, boy.
So obviously, Ra had a large cultural impact in Egypt at the time. He was sort of the primary deity for 3,000 years, which is 1,000 years on the Christians, even just though in a smaller, more focused area.
Right.
The pharaohs would call themselves sons of Ra.
Yeah.
And that was their claim of divine right to rule, was kind of claiming to be in some way descended directly from Ra.
Yes.
Ra also makes a rather unfortunate appearance in the Old Testament as the god of the pharaohs and antagonist of Moses.
Oh, yeah.
Which is expected because the Egyptians are sort of the baddies in that story.
Yeah.
So maybe one he would like you to forget, but it is there. And at least some scholars trace some theological influences from Ra to Christianity that I came across, especially the idea of other gods being an aspect of Ra, and kind of the relationship of Ra and Osiris, who have a bit of a similar relationship to Hathor and right. Ra in terms of being son, father, son sort of thing. But in more modern influences, so there is a Black American experimental composer and cosmic philosopher, Sun Ra.
Sun Ra. I was hoping you were going to bring him up. Yeah.
Which we now know is a bit like being named like Table Mesa, which literally means table, or Shrimp Scampi, which literally means shrimp. That's right. So Sun Ra means sun. But so then of course Autumn there's Autumn the God Eater, which is a character in Marvel Comics and part of his Autumn Ray. And now in fiction, we have the Staff of Ra is a primary device in the hit 1983 movie Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, right.
That is the staff, that the head of the staff is what they're looking for throughout the whole movie in order to find the Ark.
That's right.
And there is the book The Heir of Ra, and this is where I'm getting into a little bit of our YA fiction, by M. Sazanowski, and it says in that one, an excavation of the fabled Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx unleashes an ancient disease that leaves Alyssa's father fighting for his life. As Alyssa races to find the cure, she stumbles upon a haunting artifact and trespasses into the mind of an Egyptian god. So that's one. And then there is the Mask of Ra, which is a mystery thriller set in ancient Egypt. And then in video games, there's a video game called The Path of Ra to help the spirit of the dead pharaoh travel the path of Ra across the underworld. So somebody has taken that underworld journey and turned it into a video game, which actually,
I mean, it's a natural fit. It really is. Yeah.
I think that's pretty clever. So have to look that one up at some point. Then there, of course, is we mentioned the Egyptians were the inventors of beer. So there are a couple of beers named after Ra.
Right.
The one that I thought was the most interesting was a beer. It's a lager called the Tears of Ra.
Oh, so, yes.
And then there is an Autumn Ra clothing line also.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I found on him. So again,
I kept waiting for the holster of Ra, but nothing.
No, there was nothing.
I would assume that the staff needed to be placed somewhere convenient to his belt when his hands need to be free or he needed to work with his beak. But no,
no. I know. I could not find one on that. So, which is unfortunate.
It is.
A lot of searches came up with things about RAs, which is not for resident assistants.
Resident assistants, yeah. No.
Not what I was looking for.
We have no good stories about that from our childhood. Certainly not.
Certainly. So yeah, I think on this one, I'm gonna have to go with Ra on this. I think he's maybe broken through a little bit more from what I saw.
You know, with all due respect to the Coptic farmer calendar and the uranium miners up in Saskatoon, I think I'm with you. I think Ra gets my vote as well.
Yeah, just Sun Ra might have been enough to do it, but
yeah, that guy cooked, man. He was good.
Yeah, interesting stuff. All right, so it is 3-1, right? Yes,
so we have a clinch.
We do have a clinch, but we are still going on to that all-important matinee idol round.
Clutch,
deciding round often. And that is, again, of course, who would make the better movie or limited series?
Right.
And I will take this one first. So there are a couple different ways I felt like I could have gone with a Raw movie. One is kind of a creation myth Nova style documentary narrated by Lord David Attenborough or whatever the most posh British person I could find. Which that could have been interesting. But I think it is that night ride through the underworld that has the epic feel that I couldn't resist. I feel like it has an arc that's great for a feature length film.
Sure.
And so my idea was kind of you open on an image of an object launching into a pre-dawn twilight sky. Of course, as it gets closer, this dark object realizes that it is a baby hurtling through the air. And then just as the height of its arc of the flight, the baby begins to mature before our eyes, landing gracefully as a 10-year-old boy on the deck of a flying boat. And the boat sails higher. The audience sees a floating text, sort of like a Star Wars style, explaining the daily journey of Ra across the sky and hinting at that more treacherous night journey. So then when it really kicks off, you get the first third of the movie is kind of assembling your team, sort of Ocean's 11 style, right. Or any good action ensemble movie. You meet the snake-headed guards, you meet Hathor, you meet some of the other goddesses and gods, accompanying Ra, Isis, Nephthys, Thoth as the baboon, voiced by Sir Ian McKellen.
Classy.
Yeah, you get Ra meets Osiris, the god of the underworld, in his palace, and then we get kind of that action part of the journey begins. A desperate journey, dragging the boat through the sand, attacked by flying snakes and demons.
A lot of CGI.
Yeah, you get some bending of space and time. He confronts his own corpse and merges with it.
Yeah.
And then back on the water for that climactic chase scene with the giant serpent Apophis. When you get your brief denouement with his supporters and handing out clothing, and then that final scene, entering the rear of the snake and the reverse peristalsis,
Yes.
and then launching out of the snake's mouth as an object in the dawn sky, dark object floating away from us.
And the bookend is complete.
Yes, and so it is. You see, it's starting all again.
Oh,
And
if only Stanley Kubrick were around to make that for us today.
Exactly. And I was thinking, Dev Patel,
Nice.
star of The Green Knight, would play Ra, because this actually movie would actually be less weird than The Green Knight.
The Green Knight.
So I think I think that he could handle it easily. In that the scene of him merging with the corpse, I can kind of picture.
Yeah,
almost directly lifted from The Green Knight.
Very good actor. He can handle it.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right.
Love it. Love it. I would watch that movie with eyes wide open. So on the Hathor side, we talked about she's, of course, the ultimate dedicated mother, giving birth to the sun every morning, accompanying Ra on his journey across the sky. But she's also a ruthless assassin as part of the Eye of Ra. And we have to assume that because she's spending her days on the big boat, all that assassin work is probably happening in the evening hours.
Yeah.
So to make it more complicated, at least in my telling of the story, she is impregnated each night at sunset and has to give birth the next morning, which means throughout the night, she is pregnant and becoming more and more pregnant as the evening wears on. Right. So her movie, the movie of Hathor, is the story of a most unusual movie character, doting mother by day, pregnant assassin by night. You haven't seen that archetype out there.
No.
So, we see her avenge the enemies of Ra under cover of darkness, all while experiencing hormone swings and unusual food cravings. Even as she grows in size throughout the night, as she becomes more and more pregnant, she still moves with the strength of a lioness, the skill of a cobra, and the delicate shade of a sycamore tree, I guess. And every night, to wind down, she calms her murderous rage by, of course, enjoying a few flagons of red ale, just to calm her down, get her back in the mode for giving birth. Now, it's the olden days, so drinking during pregnancy it's not frowned upon just yet.
Yeah, they didn't know.
And she's also, she's given birth thousands of times, so she's not worried about it. In the event, if in the morning her newborn son, the son, has any issue with that behavior, with having a few red beers before giving birth, she can say, too bad. I'm your mother until around lunchtime when I become your daughter, or you become my boss. Once the sun's headed down, we become lovers. It's all a lot to take in. And then it all starts again, because as we all know, the job of a mother/daughter, employee, lover, assassin is never done. So for casting, a natural choice was Uma Thurman. We know she can do all the good assassin stuff from her fine work in Kill Bill. She also got her daughter, Maya Hawke, who looks a lot like her, also a really good performer. So you can sort of do some dual role casting if you need to do any flashbacks, and you need to do any multi-age stuff. And as Ra, I think we got to go with Ethan Hawke, because he is has sort of both boyish and rugged. He can kind of can work through all ages of man. Also is Uma's ex-husband, and became that recordedly because he was a bit of a cad during their marriage. So, and he's Maya's father. So there's also a lot of interesting sort of behind the camera tension at play in them playing these roles. It'd be great to see them all on screen together again. And in a small but important role, you got to have that flashback scene with Bobby, the insulting baboon god. So, who do we cast for that? It's got to be Paul Giamatti. I mean, was there any doubt?
No doubt at all.
Maybe a little bit of CGI, but we know he's got the range, and it wouldn't be a movie without a little Paul Giamatti. So that is the ever pregnant assassin of the sky, coming soon to a highly experimental cinema near you.
Yeah, that is interesting. I like that.
Yeah,
all right.
Plays with some unusual tropes, but I think it could be something. Well, I think I got to give my vote to yours on this one. I think that not only just the exquisite sort of infinite loop of the tale and how you spun it, but that journey is custom made for the screen. I don't know how you can lose with that.
Yeah, I got to give you marks for some originality in there. I like the because I think her being pregnant throughout her assassination really adds an extra element of tension.
Sure.
You see pregnant lady fighting with trained killers. That's
Not good. Yeah. Stakes are high.
Stakes are definitely high. But I'm gonna stick with Rob, because I do think that as a natural, just the story itself lends itself to the cinema, and we're saying that they made a video game out of it, and I'm sure somebody will make that video game into a movie, because that's
hey, if the early episodes of The Last of Us are any indication, there is a way you can make great art out of a video game. So here's hoping.
Yeah. So all right.
So we have a winner.
We do have a winner.
I didn't mention this up front, Andrew, but I think is the winner of season 2's episodes, will they get the golden ankh, or is it still the golden apple?
Oh, that's a good question. I thought maybe a golden ale, but
golden, even better. Golden ale it is. That's right. Very good. Because they could both handle it. It would, even if Hathor had won,
it's culturally appropriate.
Very good. The golden ale it is. Sold.
Excellent. All right.
So Ra is the winner of episode 1, season 2. Well, thank you for a lively kick in back to the new season, Andrew. It has been fun. A reminder, of course, thanks to the great DJ Andy Snow for our theme music. Once again, this season, we are available anywhere you can find us. We're always here to tell you to like, subscribe, leave a review, particularly a good one. And the website, of course, the official God versus God playlist on Spotify, that will be renewed with a new song or 2 per episode starting again now. And by all means, tell your friends, if it wasn't weird enough in season 1, Egyptians, we're going even deeper.
Yes, we are. All right.
Always a pleasure. Well done. And folks, we'll see you soon with episode 2.
All right. Bye.
Bye.